is there we go. I Slobs just had an update, and I hit a button, and it had to think for a second, but I think we're good now. So why don't we? If any of you want to sponsor boxes during the course of our discussion, then you certainly may. And what we'll do is we'll finish up the kind of the thought that we're going through with the gentleman above, and I'll pop open your box for you on stream. Inna Delicia is a dollbound warlock. I have one not introduced named Maduri. Is this a soft double L, or is this a hard? Okay, so she's the rogue and hasn't been introduced yet. Ah, well then. I would love to see her art, unless if you've posted it already, D-Frog. Alright, so gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you very much for your time again tonight as we continue our discussion of beer, IRL, and as we were exploring yesterday, we made an entire town around it, which spawned a culture, an economy. It spawned geography, even though it probably would have been the other way around, right? IRL anyway. And tonight, tonight, we're going to start out with something that might be a bit of a travesty given what we were talking about here. In the player's handbook, it talks about being able to be proficient with brewer supplies. And in fact, as a dwarf, that's one of the 3 options that are just given to you to take, because they expect you as a dwarf to culturally be proficient. And yet, when you open up the player's handbook, we go from the general description of artisan tools immediately down to disguise kit. And I feel that we would be doing brewing and brewer supplies as an entry a disservice if we don't discuss what would you have, what would be brewer supplies in D&D terms. What would you carry around if we even could brew portably? Or would that be, well, if we go to an installation that has them there, we just know how to work the permanent tools and not the travel tools. And with that prompt, I want to open it back up to you all to address this grievous oversight.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, Maddie, I want to make sure that we all give a shout out and say, screw you, Chris Perkins, because that should be there. Come on now.
How iconic is ale and beer, as we were talking about, right?
Well, exactly. I spent a couple of hours last night after we had gotten offline thinking about this. In fact, I didn't get to sleep until very late. My head was racing, and I was thinking about it. And I was thinking, like, what constitutes Brewer's tools? Like, what really is that all about? And what elements could we include in that rationally that would serve some purpose in itinerant Brewer's tools? Yeah. Like, what would he have? Or she or it or whatever. And so what would those tools be? And so, yeah. And so for sure there's this concept of, every task has a tool. And that's like saying, well, what's a chef's tools? I mean, sure, we could talk about a whisk, but I mean, really, is he going to carry a whisk?
Yeah.
Maybe not, right?
So here's the thing that to my estimate, is sort of going to burst the bubble. To make beer on the side of a road, you're going to be able to carry a pot and something to start a fire, and you might even be able to have access to water or whatever. So a pot and something to stir it with, but you have to let that product condition for quite some time before it is actually enriched with alcohol.
However,
yeah,
I'm going to fight back at you.
Okay.
No, maybe not. No.
What are we in? Are we in D&D? Are we in Cthulhu? Or are we in Star Wars because I have.
I'll give you 4d6. If you beat 4d6, then I'll let you walk away with that one. If you beat my 4d6.
10, 16. I'm right, you're wrong.
Hold on.
A gentleman's duel.
It's 15, but I get a +2 because 17.
Okay.
Let me put it this way: we house ruled this shiz. Okay, so here's what I was thinking. In terms of the brewing on the road question, if one requires safe drinking matter on the road,
Mm-hmm.
there is nothing stopping during a short rest putting a little brew together, popping it into a jug on the back
Okay.
with a little stopper so that it doesn't leak everywhere. And that could, if you're on the road, nothing unreasonable about carrying that with you. And a couple of days on the road is all it would take.
Yeah, and theoretically, it could be created with the same pot, spoon, and semi airtight, like the same pot, the same spoon that you cook the food with.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
After the food, you could spend an hour and make a small batch of beer.
Yeah, or a demijohn procured from a cart somewhere along the way. But in terms of tools, yeah, I mean, a pot, sure. A spoon, well, not necessary, really, but useful.
Depends how heat resistant your dwarf's hand is.
And could be utilized as a weapon in some cases. But one thing that we would typically include in a brewer's set of tools is some way to measure the gravity of the liquid.
Yeah.
Now, that has application deep in game land, right? There may be knowledge, there may be scientific information that could be gleaned. How that gets used, I don't know. I mean, that's up to the DM. But
yeah.
I'd agree with you, Greg.
But that would be one of the few tools that really would be unique to that profession.
And really, the difference between a guy that knows how to boil water and a guy.
The difference between a rando and a brewer. Were the brewer able to
read a hygrometer?
To procure a hygrometer of some make, and they're not hard to make.
No,
certainly something that could be made in that environment.
Can you go over real quick what the gravity of liquid is, if like as a review, or what?
Sure.
Why is it important to measure? Because to a lot of people, you're like, well, gravity exists. That's what holds us to the ground. Why are we measure? Is the liquid a special? Is it attracted to the earth more? There seems to be a certain extra sense to that.
We just got to be very careful here.
So you remember
what exactly is the shape of the Earth? Sorry, in this world. Okay, we're good.
So if you remember yesterday, I was talking about in the process you're making a sugar water.
Yeah.
The wort, the pre-beer. What a hydrometer does is it tells you the percentage of water v sugar. So you would measure the amount of sugar in the water before, and then you would ferment it, and you would measure the water of sugar after, and with some calculation, you would subtract the small number from the large number, and the part that is missing was consumed by yeast and turned into alcohol and CO2.
Okay.
So this provides a mechanism, number one, to create some kind of consistency in the recipe.
Yeah.
But would also certainly let you know when there was enough alcohol to have purified the water that was used. Right? If it weren't boiled, per se, right?
Because like a 0.2% beer isn't going to get it done for you, but a 2.2% beer will be, and you can't possibly know that without this tool.
And a hydrometer, when you say that, or if we're thinking a fantasy setting, something that comes to mind, and I could very well be grossly off because this is not my hobby nor profession. I remember those, they're like barometers, what are they called? The Da Vinci barometers that are like a sealed container, and then they have little glass floaters that can go up or down depending on the temperature or the air pressure. Something like that, like a floater or a stopper, is what's coming to my mind. But what could we use? Is it something simple like a weighted cork, or is it?
Ultimately, yes. The way I would sort of see it in this universe, and in the RP world, I see that as being a tool that had been handed down for generations, that has some kind of floating hardwood.
Okay.
Inscribed with some kind of scale, and on one end it would be weighted such that it will drop down into a liquid, and the 0 mark would be the equilibrium point in pure water or just water. And as you add sugar, that would float shallower because the density of the liquid is higher, would push that stuff up. Buoyancy would increase, and as alcohol is produced, buoyancy would be reduced, and it would sink deeper in. So it could literally be, and it could be imbued with magical power. It could be imbued with, I mean, it could be a weapon. In the back of my head, I see Gimli carrying, a stick in his pack that's got a big ruby at the bottom of this inlaid, ornately carved stick. That's sealed tight because the pores have been dropped into so many brews over the years that it's like shellacked on the outside. But he knows when it hits rune X, that must mean that the beer is good to drink. Or if it's not there, it isn't good to drink, because that's all a hygrometer is. It's a sealed vial that's weighted so that 0 is what is read for the gravity of a liquid with no sugar or alcohol, aka tap water.
And we're being given a visual demonstration here of a modern one. Yeah.
So these are,
but they're like Greg says, they're all the. I'm just gonna yoink. The only difference between this and one made in period is that one would be made wood. And the creek, they would put a line on it, and they would put a line, and they would know where the safe drinking zones were.
And as you're saying, with 2.2% being a minimum, is that 2.2% is the safe, it's been purified water? I mean, quote unquote water. Or,
I guess this number would be. This would ultimately be trial and error. I think there is probably an actual number in the mechanism that is right, but I think in terms of keeping it on story, right, in terms of RP land, it would be just as good to say the boiling would have purified it anyway. But they may not understand that. We didn't understand that as brewers for a few thousand years, because we didn't understand that bad things lived in water until they were boiled. We didn't understand. I mean, when was the concept of pasteurization developed?
Oh,
here's a hint.
What, 18...
His name is Pasteur.
Yeah.
That's a recent change. And it was only after at that point where we realized, we didn't really need to make the beer or alcohol. All we had to do was heat the water up to 160 for 3 minutes. And so as a result, now the benefit is we understand that mechanism. And we can say, hey, you know what? Boiling the beer is all it takes. What do you... Oh, okay. Love you. Mm-hmm. Night-night. Okay, you gotta go. Okay, cool. He's like... Daddy, show them my card.
Oh, snap. Magic the Gathering. You're in a good hobby. I'm biased.
It's the only card he
very
had to. It's
expensive
the only
hobby.
card he had to have in his deck because that is orange.
Oh, you have a mythic rare. Okay.
And
Yeah.
it's a mythic.
Yeah, Ishkana, Graph Widow. Okay, Bill. Love you. Night.
I gotta send that kid a couple decks, man.
Yeah, you do because he's totally hooked. He's trying to
I'll-
build
I'll
a
s-
spider deck right now.
I'll send you Legacy Goblins. That'll just kick the hell right out of everything he could possibly build.
Yeah, so it was only even in the last couple hundred years that we really started to understand that it was the boiling that made this stuff safe. And
Yeah.
so I can only imagine that if you're a dwarf of brewing tradition, it's not the boiling that's safe; it's the beer. And so there's going to be a number that they look at and go, okay, this is the good line.
Or they're going to have a stick that, like, this much difference on the stick is the difference between dead and alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Because it would, like Greg said, it would probably be a piece of heavy hardwood and a light, like, balsa or something like that, and they would just notch it with their blade.
Yeah.
I definitely like to think of it as a fancy thing and a hand carved thing and runes inscribed and
Yeah, when
Yeah.
the apocalypse happen, I'll be making mine out of Douglas fir and cedar.
I'll
Thi-
make mine
this-
out of them.
This hydrometer has been passed down in McLean for 2,000 years. He's
But-
holding up
but
this family
that's
heirloom.
That's
and-
absolutely an RP point that's valid.
Yeah. And you know what? Even going off of what you all were talking about, if you said that it's been used in all these brews, it could have those yeast samples that have been brewed over generations, right? As a part of it when it's
Absolutely.
dropped into it.
Especially if it's wood.
Now, with that being said, if we have some of the basics, unless there's more actual gear, because I think too when we think of brewing, we think of distillation like coils and all sorts of Rube Goldberg like steam whistles and funnels and all this other stuff and tubes and all that. Is that I can understand that in a big brewery setting, but would you need something like that as a physical supply on the road?
No,
And would you need something to stabilize it? Like if you have this barrel on your back and it's sloshing, can it ferment if it's moving around like that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, we should talk about the scale, because you're talking a barrel. We're like the size of that.
We're talking a demijohn.
Or like a 5-gallon barrel on your back, like a backpack or something.
Well, and a dwarf.
But you would have to carry a 5-gallon. Well, if to make 5 gallons of beer, you need a 7-gallon pot.
Oh, then that's going on the list. A 7-gallon pot to make 5 gallons of beer. Okay.
Yeah, but you could easily make a gallon, a half gallon,
Okay.
in the pot after the meal was cooked by the adventurers.
But it would take a couple days, you said, to ferment, or
Well, to ferment out, it'll take a couple of days.
Yeah.
But I can see this, and speaking as a brewer, there is a therapeutic value to the process.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about, the things one does on a short rest or a long rest that, revive and imbue morale. I don't think there would be too many things that a dwarf would enjoy more.
I personally in real life have flown to Edmonton from Ontario to sit in Greg's garage and brew beer.
It's cathartic.
It's absolutely salubrious for body and mind.
And
So-
hey, if you're a dwarf, you got a lot more time because you can live to be 500-600. So think about all
Well,
the...
exactly. And so these become a lifetime obsession, a lifetime
You get better
Pastime, if
the
you
more
will.
you do it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so, if you've done it for 75 years, are you going to stop just because you happen to be doing a 3-day march to get to, I don't know, Fall Crest, whatever.
Doubtful.
Yeah.
Heck,
Right?
if anything, you got to keep your cultures alive, right? You got to dip them in
Exactly.
something, keep them wet.
Yeah, exactly. So this, to me, is a kind of a part of. It could certainly be culturally a part of that, in an RP world.
Would you have? I guess then for the road, you were showing off last night. You said, "Well, here's 5 gallons of beer," and you showed some containers. As a part, because it doesn't just say tools necessarily; it also says supplies. Would I be carrying around a satchel or some sort of container of sugar, of different, like a bag of grain, or are there other supplies?
Realistically, you probably wouldn't want to take grain, but a stack of sugar would be a great idea. And you can make a beer-like substance out of anything that'll give you sugar.
I can see carrying some grain or procuring it in town.
Yeah.
You don't, for 5 gallons, you're only maybe talking about 10 pounds of grain. So if you're already hoofing a 5-barrel, a barrel of 5 gallons on your back, and just so that you know, a 5-gallon barrel weighs about 50 pounds, which isn't outrageous for a dwarf.
Yeah.
If you're carrying an empty
grain
barrel with 10 pounds of grain in it, and you stop by a creek for your rest, and you cook up a batch, why not? I think that's reasonable. You might be a hefty dwarf. I don't know. And I don't know. I don't know what the sort of the load-bearing capacity of the average adventurer is. I know it's greater than that of an unladen swallow, but
African or European? I'm compelled to ask.
What? I don't know.
African or European?
I don't know.
Forsaken asks a good question, and I'm pardon me for not doing it, but as we do have new people here from last night, if you want to give yourselves a quick reintroduction, then please go ahead and do so.
That guy over there is Luke, and I'm the handsome one.
Mildly attractive head.
Moderately attractive.
Moderately attractive head.
Yeah.
Well, your head is your best feature.
It is. He actually twisted the tips of my mustache once, which means that in Alabama we're married.
And you, sir, have a magnificent mustache. I wish I could get that going, man.
I am far too lazy about it. Is my problem. So most of the time it just looks like pubic hair. But when I take the time to wax it,
Craig, would like Carafa be a base malt that they would use?
2-row. It'll be 2-row.
Just 2-row.
I'm trying traditional. Actually, at the time, I used to brew with wooden leg. I love it.
That's creative.
Yeah, I mean, yeast are very small, and so sloshing around in a bucket really doesn't mean anything to them. So they could absolutely. There's a joke. That's a bad one. That's.
It's my nature. I have to.
That's straight to the penitentiary joke.
How many pounds or how many kilos in 10 pounds?
3.8.
4.
4.2. Sorry, it's about 4.2, I think.
Yeah, you probably only need like 10 pounds would be 10 pounds would be 2.2% beers. Like, so 10 gallons at 2.2. So I think a 10-pound sack for an adventure would be plenty, because you could do 2 5-gallon brews out of that sack.
There you go.
And from last night, if I'm recalling, because I am trying to pay attention to my professors here, at 2.2%, that is what you were calling like a table beer. Like it sterilized the water, but it's not necessarily going to get you drunk. But it's a meal, it's a drink, it's water, and there you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
All of the above.
Yeah.
This is
10 pounds of grain would get you 2 5-gallon batches of 2.2% beer.
Okay.
So at least 3 days worth.
For a party of 3 or 4.
Or a dwarf.
Or a very interesting afternoon for a dwarf.
Yeah. Speaking of whizzing in the woods, the story the line we use in brewing is that when properly made, there are no known human pathogens that can survive in beer, and so you don't need to worry about if a beer was brewed correctly. You don't need to worry about plague. You don't need to worry about
TB,
dysentery, or TB, or botulism.
Yeah.
Because they will be killed off by the alcohol.
Yeah,
or boiled out.
Nothing that can kill you can live in an alcohol-rich environment.
So this is it would be as much a...
What's up, bro?
As much, I think, as much a psychological boon. You've also got the caloric value, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be better than that dry-ass elf bread.
Now, to be clear as well, we are far from being able to brew something at 2.2% that you could bust your cask open and set it on fire.
Yeah, that wouldn't happen.
Okay. It'll put out fires.
You require 50% alcohol to set something on fire.
Yeah.
Yeah. At a minimum,
even the strongest
ethanol.
Well-brewed... Sorry to cut you off, Greg.
No, it's okay. I was just saying 50% ethanol is what's required. So that's 100 proof, which is why the proof scale is what it is.
Yeah.
Is there a way that we could measure the proof of our traveling? We can measure our gravity. Is there a way we could travel the proof of our beer?
Well, the beer will never reach a proof high enough to be flammable.
Yeah.
Ever.
Even remember how we were talking that beer is water and mead is like whiskey?
Yes.
I'd say wine, but anyway, I mean,
wine,
equivalent.
Anything. It's the next level of alcoholism. You couldn't, in today's conditions, with the efficiency and the alcohol, with just mead, get it so that it would flash.
Yeah.
Okay.
The highest
need to distill it.
Yeah, the highest alcohol content you can home ferment, not lab
17?
ferment, 22.
22.
22, and that's made with a specific yeast called Turbo Wash. It tastes a little bit like cleaning supplies. It's horrendous.
It tastes like white spirit.
Yeah, it tastes like you'd clean brushes in it.
Yeah.
And 50% is the flash point for a distilled spirit.
Gotcha. So we're not getting close unless we're doing shenanigans.
Right. When we talk about moonshine, like if you talk about moonshine, which is probably the sort of the flip side of this, if we were going to talk about a traveling distillation setup, which may well have been referred to as brewing. I mean, we don't know. We now know what it means to distill, but perhaps they didn't, in this environment, and probably they didn't. Alchemists might understand it, but the average dwarfo doesn't know it.
Certainly, old Wheatwater wouldn't be setting any caravans on fire.
No, not at all. No.
Yeah. When you create moonshine's generally good moonshine is 150 to 175, 80 proof. So that's basically 75% alcohol.
And it's
The way
still a
proof,
pain in the ass to get
and for
lit.
anybody who's not aware, the reason it's called proof on alcohol is when that liquor was originally made, and this is 200 plus years ago. I mean, distillation's been around for a long time. They would mix the alcohol with gunpowder, and then they would light the gunpowder on fire. If the gunpowder didn't flash, there was more water than alcohol. If it flashed, that meant that the alcohol content was high enough that it didn't soak the gunpowder.
Yeah.
And that's where the 100 proof is. 100 proof, 100%, or 100 proof alcohol means it'll catch fire. And that happens to be 50% alcohol.
And that's interesting then, because if you do bring up a concept of proof in your game, that might imply you have black powder or some other sort of, we can call it alchemy or something along those lines.
Yeah.
You have a way to test. So really we'd only be measuring on the gravity at that point in time to see.
That's right. Below that, you're looking at gravity. And again, below that number, below a distillation process, you're talking about ultimately a foodstuff, right? It would be the same as, baking bread when you stopped for a rest. However, as I said, you go down to the Appalachians, there's more than a few guys who cruise around with the appropriate equipment in the back of their truck to create, 180 proof alcohol in the woods.
Yeah.
Quality shine, yeah.
You have some of that around, don't you, Luke?
Oh yes. Oh, you know what? Let's celebrate this conversation.
Are we going to do that? Let's do
A
that.
friend of mine has some apple pie moonshine that it's pretty tasty stuff.
Apple pie? I can do apple pie.
There's some, there's some good old spiced. So this is about 30%. So this isn't going to set anything on fire.
Yeah.
Except my gut.
You bring up another good point too. If we have this style of, I guess, brew as you go, we're looking at probably like a cloudy beer. The beer we often see that's a product of modern, clarification and all that. But a lot of our beers are going to be
runny porridge.
Runny porridge. Okay.
Cheers, buddy.
Hold on, I got to drink coffee.
I forgot to get my pitcher of water. Well, cheers to you, gentlemen.
Yep.
We'll just pretend that I hear clink, and
It's all good. It's all good. We're used to it. We do this online all the time.
Yeah. Our show is primarily one of us gets drunk and the other one carries the show, and then the following week we switch.
Would we need, looking over this list as well, when we're talking about the barrel, and I know last night you said things like maybe charcoal firing, the inside, or some metal bands. Would you need anything like waxes to seal the cork?
No. No, those barrels...
Properly made barrels
pressure fit. They're pressure fit. As soon as they're wet, they'll actually swell sealed.
Okay.
And so one would assume that anybody who brews and ferments in those would understand this.
A dwarf of any
would have a proper
would not bring a shitty barrel.
Yeah, he'll have a good barrel that would be properly prepared.
Not like a coffee table barrel, like a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is fundamentally possible to boil water with fire in paper. If it's done correctly. So you
can boil water in a plastic bottle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So long as it's set up correctly.
Yep.
This is a very doable thing. I don't know how practical it would be, but again, playing the character, the overcoming the limitations of carrying a barrel on your back aside, probably not a big deal.
Like Greg, other than a hygrometer,
there's really very little that's required.
Yeah.
Like
to grind grain, use rocks.
Probably a dwarf would have a starter.
He would probably have a packet of yeast from the last brew.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And would be able to carry it along. Even if that was just Maybe he's got a very small wineskin that contains the leavings at the bottom of the barrel from the previous
all you would
batch.
have to do would be to add water to the leavings, like that shrub.
You wouldn't even need to add water. You could literally just scoop it into a container that seals. And it would be fine for a week or two. I mean, I've got yeast in my fridge that's perfectly viable, that's 4 years old.
Yep,
That's just sitting in a jar.
Huh.
The stuff
4 years
lasts.
old,
The stuff lasts a long time. Once it goes dormant, it just chills out. It sits there. So as long as it was rot was prevented, and on a short trip, not a hard thing to do. And it can even be dried out.
And that might be the motivation for continuing to brew is you've got to continue to keep your yeast
healthy, and so you've got to brew every 4 days to keep that starter alive.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting.
There's no refrigeration, right?
So we're presuming that this is temperate, or heck, as you guys were talking about this, I just started going through the module Tomb of Annihilation in my open store game, and that takes place in a rainforest, in a jungle where it's hot and humid every day. It probably rains at least once a day, or 6 days out of the week. And when you're talking about this, especially because there could be a lot of stagnant water in jungles and swamps, you might want to carry beer to have that purification. And even maybe you find some things along the way to throw in there to brew as you go.
Yeah. And I'll tell you this, Matty, if I live in a community in a jungle and I was in charge of the village's beer, I would absolutely be collecting as much rainwater as I possibly could.
And
because that'll make better beer than whatever surface water there is.
Yeah, for sure.
I wonder in that environment, so we talk about rye and wheat and such. Can you use water, like a more watery grain like rice or something to make?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not beer anymore. Then it's just sake.
Okay, yeah.
But again, it would be a rice wine or a rice beer. Actually, you can make a rice beer in about 3 days as well.
Wild wheat grows in the jungle.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Have you all heard of anything exotic? Like, for instance, for wine, you can have dandelion wine. Is there anything like cattails that you can brew into beer that you've heard of? Or
you require a starch-bearing seed, and that limits because of the growing season. There are only certain times of year where you're going to be able to collect those things.
But it could be quinoa. Soy. They're gross, but
it would be disgusting.
Any
potatoes.
anything.
Potatoes are what you make vodka from.
Yeah,
right? And it's just beer, but it's made with potatoes, so we call it vodka. But it's the same process.
Whiskey is just beer, but it's made with corn, and vodka and whiskey are distilled, but the base, like
the beverage that comes first,
would
be ultimately a beer. But we
so it's only the finished product we're aware of that earns its name of vodka.
Beer.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Along the way, all you're doing is fermenting something sweet.
Yeah.
And that doesn't, if you make it out of ketchup and tang, it's Pruno. If it's potatoes, it's vodka. If it's corn, it's whiskey. If it's rice,
I can give you a quick overview of
it's Budweiser.
If you have no intention of taking the sugar water, fermenting it, and then doing anything else, that's beer. So sugar water is called wort.
Yep.
Beer. And if you're going to distill it, it's not called beer anymore. It's called wash.
Correct.
And then the distilled alcohol is called a spirit.
And then the spirit
But-
has names based on what it was
On what it's
distilled
made from.
Okay.
what it's distilled from. But at the very beginning of every one of those processes, it's water and something with starch that you can extract for sugar.
Yeah.
And they'll definitely be all along the side of any trail. Like wheat grows in the jungle. It's called the jungle babbler.
And when we talked about, those ingredients that make a beer, the chocolate beer or the caramel flavored beers that are made with grain and only grain, and you can get those flavors out of just grain. That doesn't mean that there isn't a history of making beer using ingredients to flavor it. There is nothing that would stop somebody from making a garlic beer or an onion
or a pepper beer
or a pepper beer for flavoring, right? To make it discreetly different than something that's basically yeast water with some alcohol, because yeast in its own is not a particularly tasty thing. And so it's certainly something you could throw green onion into to flavor that and make it more of a food than a beer.
Like anything, like even cardamom.
Yeah.
You could make a product with cardamom that wouldn't be called beer or ale, but it would still have the same keep you alive properties.
And is that when we're getting to things like Marmite or like these like pastes, like these yeast pastes? Or
Well, Marmite is actually a very specific product, and it is the product of the Cooper's Brewery in Australia.
okay,
Sorry, Vegemite is. Marmite's the English
Vegemite.
or Vegemite.
that comes from Newcastle. Newcastle makes it.
It's either
that is, that's the
Newcastle
yeast
or
leavings.
Green King.
Yeah, that's the yeast leavings from a brewery.
Yeah.
Mixed with a little bit of molasses and some other flavorants, right? But basically that's what it is. It's yeast. It's just yeast, which is pure protein for us,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, you can eat that stuff too.
Some people actually seem to like that substance.
I think they're crazy, but some do.
Hey,
Hell yeah,
TJ.
Vegemite.
TJ's all on it.
TJ does live in a particular hemisphere that's not the northern one.
Okay.
Quality hemisphere.
You have nice stars down there.
Mm-hmm.
I have a need to see the Large Magellanic Cloud at some point in my life.
Oh, dude, I thought you were talking about Kylie.
Minogue?
Huh, so if you have these
I'd hit
leavings
that.
behind too, so we're getting the food product in this. Now, what if we were to scale this? In the player's handbook, it's saying that brewer supplies cost 20 gold pieces, and honestly, I think a lot of that might be, if we look in Chapter 5 here, let's see. Let's
That
compare.
Definitely refer to pots and boiling and kettles and, do they actually show something?
An
about
iron
tools?
pot is 2 gold pieces. There are barrels. Let's see. A barrel is 2 gold pieces, and I believe it said that they're referring to that as a. I think that's the 5-gallon variety.
I think that's a safe assumption.
I'm gonna maximize that screen.
So still though, I mean, if we look at, I think there's cooking supplies, or they call a mess kit. So that's kind of generic kitchen tools that would have a spoon to stir a pot.
That would be fine, yeah.
That's only 2 silver pieces.
Yeah.
And so if we have a, oh geez, where's our money going? D&D, where's our money going if we buy a brewer's kit?
Your money is going to
Clearly it's going to Wizards of the Coast.
WotC wants your money, folks.
We just want to subsidize the production of magic.
Iron pots, 2 gold pieces, and then
And of course, they got to pay for packs.
The place that you keep the packet of yeast from your last brew
Mm-hmm.
you would want that to be a very ornate. It would have to be sort of air, certainly liquid tight.
It would be likely heirloom of some kind too.
Yeah. Well, and like you wouldn't ever have a cheap one of those because it would stop the entire process. Some of that money would be the grain. I don't know what the. I don't think.
Probably be cheap. That would be coppers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
They actually do have grains and such as kind of a discussion of economy in this chapter too, and we can look into that. So if your 30 gold pieces might be buying a starter kit of grains and sugars and whatnot
Yeah.
too.
But really, like 10 pounds of grain and a sufficient amount of sugar, because like don't forget, like if with that hydrometer, if it's been 4 days and it hasn't got to the correct notch, you can throw sugar in it and it'll boost the alcohol and wait 3 more days.
Oh heck, a barrel actually. I'm looking at container capacity. A barrel to them is actually a 40-gallon barrel. And so something more along the lines, a bucket they're considering to be 3 gallons in size. So in fact, if we're going with just a 7-gallon to make the 5, it would cost even less than a 2 gold piece barrel.
Yeah. It would be cheap. So I think somewhere along the way, some innkeeper, shopkeeper is making a healthy profit on that setup.
Yeah.
Forsaken, just to answer your question in the chat, yeah, it's absolutely possible. If those barrels were well built and secure and safe and protected,
if they're airtight and
Certainly
light tight, it would totally be possible.
yeah. There were bottles of sherry recovered from an English sailing ship a couple of years ago off of the east coast of Canada that were 140 years old, I think, and they were completely drinkable. In fact, some of them went for 6 digits at auction.
Wow.
So yeah,
200 gold pieces and 9 pounds.
for what?
For what?
20 gold pieces and 9 pounds?
I have no
for
idea.
what item?
No, that's the allotment for brewing supplies.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, 9 pounds and it costs 20 gold. So I don't know. Maybe the majority of that is in that heirloom in the hydrometer. It's a
The
special tool,
hydrometer
and everything else is so common.
Yeast storage, because yeah, from a functional perspective, in terms of brewing, there isn't anything expensive, and for anybody who's actually interested or curious about the real process of modern brewing, by all means, swing by our show on Saturday nights once Maddie gets finished up, and
yeah, dude, Greg, if you
come
want,
and chat, we'll happily talk about that.
And Greg, if you want, you can drop. I don't know, Maddie, you might drop the link. We're talking about building a modern home. I was talking about building a modern home brewery, and I did a segment on YouTube. You can watch that video. And
yeah, if you want to post that, you should have permission to do so. You should be able to link to that if people want to watch.
Do you want to drop that link, Greg?
I can go get it and drop
And
it.
and if you watch that, that'll kind of give you a perspective of where, like, if you wanted to go crazy right now with a starter kit, that's what it would be. And it was $500, and it was probably 12 pounds.
In looking at trade goods, it looks like in the D&D economy, 1 copper piece will get you a pound of wheat, or 2 copper pieces will get you a pound of flour. So I guess it depends on how processed. Do you want the raw wheat, or do you want something at least somewhat milled?
You'd want the raw. Yeah, you'd absolutely
You
want
absolutely
the raw
want
wheat.
raw.
And I don't see something in particular for sugar itself. I see salt, which also in that day and age was kind of a rare commodity just for pure salt, and that's 5 copper pieces for 1 pound.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
that's,
mean,
that's probably fair.
Sugar was one of those things that really didn't get brought, like in Europe, for example. Sugar, refined sugar that you could buy, really didn't exist until probably 500 or 600 years ago, and that was generally the result of beets, because that was sugar beets was really the only place you could get that.
Until the colonization of the Caribbean, and you had sugar cane.
Until sugar cane became a viable product. It was really not available
for a second.
So it wasn't even available in the United States until late 1700s, early 1800s, as a staple that you could purchase for your home to use. So sugar as an ingredient wouldn't have been there. This would have still been a little bit of that sort of, transformation from the gods through fermentation, right?
Yeah.
And Forsaken also brings up a good thing. You could just have a container with honey in it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that could be the braggot that we were talking about. Half mead, half ale is called braggot.
What does honey cost in terms of because I can see honey being a more expensive product.
Well, let's see on their scale. This is on 157 of the Player's Handbook. We have 1 copper for a pound of wheat, or we can extrapolate that to kind of a common grain. 2 for a pound of flour or 1 chicken. 5 copper pieces for a pound of salt. A silver for 1 pound of iron or 1 square yard of canvas. 5 silver for a pound of copper or a square yard of cotton cloth. 1 gold piece for 1 pound of ginger or 1 goat. 2 gold for 1 pound of cinnamon, pepper, or 1 sheep. 3 gold for a pound of cloves or a pig. And it keeps going up from there.
Okay, so there's some interesting stuff, because ginger has medicinal qualities, obviously, and it has antibacterial qualities, as does honey. So if you're talking, for 2 gold for that much ginger, cloves also fit into that category and were a regular ingredient in beer at one time, as part of that groot that we were talking about yesterday, which is sort of the herbs and herbs and spices that would be used to make that beer safe for storage. Like this raw beer, this fresh stuff, you could drink that over the course of 3 or 4 days and it would be fine. Beyond that, it would probably start to go off. But I can see if that brewer's kit is that lightweight, it could very well be that some of that value is taken up by some of those ingredients. It could be ginger, it could be pepper, it could be clove, it could be heather.
And to put it in perspective, so that 10 pounds of grain, if you put 2 pounds of honey in it, it would take that 2.2% beer to a 5% beer. Well, it would take it to a 5% braggot.
Or if you live in North America, a honey brown ale.
Yeah. But only in the last 70 years.
I think you guys are onto something here, because when we're looking at the cost of a component pouch, which are filled with all kinds of little esoteric material components that wizards use for spells, a component pouch with all of these little copper wires and bat guano, kind of these rare, harder to find things, that costs 25 gold to purchase. And so that's
it would be a trimmed down thing, because like Greg said, you this character may have a specific
maybe a family recipe.
It might like lilac.
Yeah. Oh,
So it would
based on
have-
what you guys were talking about, if we're comparing a component count, English. Here we go. Let's try it again. Ahem. A component pouch. Before you were talking about keeping yeast. Thank you. In a watertight seal. A component pouch is a small, watertight leather belt pouch that has compartments to hold all the material components and other special items you need to cast your spells.
There you go.
There we go. I think we have a big part.
I knew there had to be a way to keep Eye of Newt fresh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See? So
Well,
it's
and they
probably some
simply
kind of like an
maybe-
oiled or seasoned leather, and yeah.
Could very
Powdered
well be
beer
little apothecary vials too.
Danuses.
Yeah. Oh, vials cost 1 gold piece in a market setting.
There you go.
Because it's
So-
glass, right? Who blows
Yeah.
glass these days?
Yeah. So an apothecary vial or a set of them in that pouch to hold those ingredients, whether they be cloves or pepper, some of those more valuable items that wouldn't necessarily have value to, the average schmo on a road looking to hoist your silver. They would certainly be of value. So that makes some sense.
Yeah.
So perhaps when we are talking about a brewer's kit, we're much more talking about that type of arrangement of pouch and a few vials of specific ingredients, as well as those very few tools that are sort of relevant to the production process.
It makes sense. Even last night, you were talking about, look, you can brew beer in a clay jug, let alone a wooden barrel or a steel pot or whatever else. So as long as you have the hydrometer and the ingredients, you could brew beer in almost whatever you want.
Maddie, I could brew beer in a pop can.
My kid, you want to know how easy it is? Go to McDonald's, grab yourself an apple juice, leave it on the kitchen counter for 2 days.
Yep.
I don't know what it is about McDonald's apple juice, but that stuff ferments like a monster. And it's and I honestly think it's almost at the edge of fermentation when you get it.
Can you get kind of what Forsaken was talking about? Although with wine, you know that we can get a vinegar from a wine. Can we get a vinegar equivalent out of beer?
Absolutely, yes, most certainly. There's 2 ways that occurs. The first way it occurs is infection due to insects, specifically
Fruit flies.
fruit flies, Drosophila. There's a reason Drosophila has been known as the vinegar fly, and it's because the fly itself is host to the bacteria that creates vinegar, and it's a bacteria called Acetobacter. We know about it now, but we didn't know about it 200 years ago. So Acetobacter makes that vinegar. It's horrible in beer. It works in wine a bit, but in beer it's just disgusting. There is another way to get that similar variation, and that is to allow the grain to sit out at a warm temperature, wet for a day before you brew it. And it's a different type of process, but ultimately the same. There is a bacteria that lives on grain that will create lactic acid. Acetobacter makes acetic acid, which is vinegar, and lactobacillus is the bacteria in question, creates lactic acid.
And that stuff is tenacious.
Yeah. Well, the lactic side isn't a big problem. It doesn't get embedded into things. Acetobacter can be a real pain.
So you would have to discard maybe your family barrel if it ever got infested?
It's quite possible. Yeah. The barrel would be considered a replaceable element in the process.
The hydrometer would be
fine.
Would be fine. It'd be made out of wood.
Yeah, but you would be putting it into boiling liquid occasionally too. Right?
Yeah.
So it would probably be all right. And it would probably also be cleaned off. It would be washed or rinsed or dried. So
Are there uses
That's
for a beer vinegar? Does it have a special name, like there is for a wine vinegar or other, like we know white vinegar and apple cider vinegar? Are there
Yeah.
uses for this at all?
Yeah, absolutely. It's called a lambic.
Yeah.
That's my favorite kind of beer.
That's a beer that's specific to the Lambic region in Belgium. And it's very
and they
fruity
are
and
soured
wild.
on purpose. They're soured on purpose. It's like drinking lemonade, but beer, but lemonade.
I think they're disgusting.
I love them.
Yeah, they're gross.
And
I'd rather be sober, in fact.
Even those, you take those beers and you add salt to them, and it becomes what's called a Gosa, which is the German variation of the same thing, which are a salted beer, a salted sour.
And surprisingly, even more gross.
There's a spectrum that really just kind of wraps around at the other end.
Yeah, because we touched on how holistic and how full circle this is, right? So a lot of the things in the adventurer's kit could absolutely be found on the side of the road. Like, he would carry full malted grain. He wouldn't need a method to crack the grain because there's rocks on the side of the road.
Yeah.
He wouldn't need to carry firewood, but we would absolutely, to brew beer, you absolutely need flint and steel.
Yeah.
Because you need to be able to start a fire.
Wow, we've definitely, we're onto something here. I've learned a ton from you all, and trying to crack into, especially the enigma of brewer supplies, which I think we were talking a little bit after the show. I think for many people who are aware that yes, you brew beer, and that's a very common sentiment. Between the PC and the DM, we just sort of give a wink and a nod. The PC says, okay, I'm proficient in brewer supplies. Do I have brewer supplies? And the DM says, yeah, sure, you have brewer supplies. And no one asks what they are. You just got to know that you have it and that you can do stuff with it. So it's this black box. Stuff goes in, something happens, and suddenly beer comes out the other end.
Yeah.
What's a short rest in 5?
An
4
hour.
hours?
Hour at least. At least
hour?
an hour, yeah. Long rest is 8. Unless you're an elf. That's 4.
You would be pushing it, Greg.
Long rest, you could certainly do a batch.
Yeah.
A short rest,
But I mean, I hate to say this, but you could ready the brew too. You could crack your grains and slap that sucker on your back and start walking.
Yeah.
And there's your mash in, right? So there's that period of time. And I mean, there is some science that would have to come into play, but let's be honest. I mean, if you got far enough in a campaign to be willing to recognize part of the process, then I'd say you're already way ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a very finite temperature range at which you have to mash grain to get that starch to convert. But it's easy enough to say, you know what, if you left it for a few hours, it would probably work too. Right?
You could probably, while you're riding or walking into your short rest, you could throw 4 or 5 large boulders into the barrel with the grain that you're about to brew.
Yeah, and grind it as you walk.
And as soon as you get there, boil some hot water and throw it in the barrel. So a short rest, if you, like somebody that was going to brew, that is absolutely a decision that they would make.
I'm sorry, I'm going to say this out loud, Luke.
Oh.
We got to do this.
Oh, you want to do a video on this and show in a D&D setting that you could...
We've got to do this.
That would be an amazing video, guys.
We have
There's only one way we're doing this, Greg.
Camping trip, man, you and me.
Full cosplay. camping trip.
Oh, hell yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be great.
I'm totally down with that. I mean, I'm willing to LARP the whole thing.
I called dibs. I called dibs on Tanis.
If you guys, please, I will help. I will help spread the word from my largest soapbox that you guys are doing this. God,
that'd be fun.
We got to figure this out. Luke.
Maybe I can even
That'd be
help
really
sponsor
fun.
some camping supplies for you too, if you need any in
I
particular.
would like to. I would like to introduce you to somebody.
Oh,
This right here, the focus is just probably not going to work, but I'm going to try it anyway.
looks like
Let's see if I
a
can
dwarf
make
with
that
a horned helmet and carrying something red is what I saw.
Yeah, let me just see if I can make this. Let me just see if I can make this work. Because I think it'd be
Oh,
great.
there we
if I
go.
could make this
A
work.
mining
Okay.
pick and a gem.
So there he is. He's got a pick and he's got a gem in one hand. This is his name is Dwarf.
Okay.
So this has been my inspiration in role play gaming. Has been for a long time. This little guy here, his name is Ironheart Tunnel Dark is his name. He is a 164th elf dwarf. It's a story we don't talk about. It's a long time ago.
It's my wife.
But
Well,
he
baby,
has been.
I love your Coke.
He's
I'm gonna
been
mix
my
it with moonshine.
inspiration since the day I picked up my first die.
Oh wow.
He
Do you have
was
any other?
he was provided to me 36 years ago. Actually, no, this was later. It was 25 years ago. 1993. What does that work out to? 93? Yeah, 25 years ago. So this was actually created for me by my cousin, who he did a gig at a local game store in Victoria, BC. And what he did was he painted minis.
Wow.
And so he gave me this and a really cool knight that's somewhere else on my table. Oh, there he is. He's right here.
I'm Mr. T, and I'm a night elf mohawk.
I also have this knight, this dark dude.
Oh, I like that.
He's
And,
beautiful.
and what wonderful memories too.
Yeah. I never played with him, but when he showed me his work, and these are pewter figures. I mean, these are original. These are 93 D&D pewter figures.
Oh, are those
from
the
Blizzard.
Partha, the Ralph Partha minis?
I wouldn't even know,
Okay.
to be very honest. I was so young when they were given to me. But that dwarf has been my guy. I've played a dwarf most of my D&D life. And so that dude's been my guy.
You can
And I
you can
would
use
love-
breadcrumbs.
I would love desperately to give Ironheart a new task, and that being putting the Brewers kit to the test.
I think you guys are onto something if you pursue this. This is a niche that I think you could hit because you have the heart of the gamers and you have the knowledge of the craft.
Not good, Luke. Doesn't bode well. Hold on.
No.
No,
What do you
it's not good. Okay. It's not a crit fail. But it's pretty close. I think this is truly a workable thing. Can you use breadcrumbs, Forsaken? Absolutely. That is the other option. Is instead of carrying grain, he carries loaves of bread.
But realistically, he would probably keep the yeast starter would probably be a more bread-like thing.
Very possible, yes.
Yeah.
Very possible. Slightly undercooked bread.
Yeah,
Still
like
has
a wet.
But remember, this is part of the trick. Bread itself, the internal temperature of bread exceeds 100 degrees. It steams.
Yeah.
And yeast will lose its viability at as little as 105 to 110 degrees. So
If you put
Celsius,
yeast in a
or
liquid,
Fahrenheit rather.
If you put yeast in the sugar water, and that sugar water is more than 70 degrees, you're gonna make boat cleaner.
Yeah, that produces it produces a lot of methanol and something called fusel alcohol.
And fusels will give you a headache and make you throw up and, pardon me, shit yourself into the next campaign.
And then they'll make you blind and you'll die.
It actually sounds like then that might be an interesting topic to pick up then in part 2. Now that we know how to create the beer, we've talked about its history. Maybe we can talk about its uses, its products or byproducts. We can talk about the methodology of not just using it, but even enjoying the beer. Through a certain custom or ritual or something along those lines. Are you guys good if we take maybe a 10-minute break and we come back and then we can talk about how to employ that, and we can talk about any other loose ends that we haven't discussed or take more questions from people?
For sure.
Absolutely.
I may have to jump out, and Luke may have to carry this football across the end zone.
Okay.
But we'll see how things go, and we'll figure that out shortly.
Okay, sure. Then let's take a couple minutes, take a break, use the restroom, get a drink or whatever you need, and we'll come back and we'll finish up this awesome exploration. And I think for the rest of the week, we can take the ideas that you're talking about and turn it into more campaign development, and to sort of offer it as a consideration for you all. So, all right, thanks guys. I'll see you soon.
Cool.